Kingdom Come Deliverance, the greatest RPG I've ever played. This is a video that I made on the first Kingdom Come game, and it is no secret that holding this game in such high regard led me to developing an extremely high level of expectations and excitement for Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. In fact, I would feel confident in saying that Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is the most I have ever anticipated a game's release in my entire life. I felt the same way about KCD 2 right up until its release on February 4th. And now that it has been many months and I have seen most of the game's content, I feel that it is time to review it. However, I must say that when I first finished this game, I didn't feel an overwhelming love for it like I did the first game. I simply expected a phenomenal game, and I got a phenomenal game. But what has really surprised me about KCD 2 is my personal journey with it. The more time that passes, the more I really adore this game. And in this video, I will be pointing out everything that I found to be spectacular about this experience. Regardless of how I felt initially, everything that I wanted to get out of KCD 2, I got. Even though I wasn't overwhelmed with shock and happiness, I was maybe even more glad to find pleasure in experiencing something that was exactly what I knew I wanted. Like any game, there are flaws with KCD 2, and I will be pointing out these flaws throughout my review. Yet I do not want to create the impression that I don't like this game as much, if not more, than the first game. By all accounts, this is a much better game than the first in every quantifiable metric. The story is better, the combat is better, the stealth is better, the RPG elements are better, the music is better, the voice acting is better, the visuals and optimization is better. Everything about KCD 2 is better than KCD 1. Yet it may not sound like that as I point out some of the flaws in KCD 2. Interestingly enough, some aspects of KCD 2 upset me more than they did in KCD 1, even if they were of a much higher quality. Enough dwelling on the negatives. Let's dive into why Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is one of the best RPGs ever made and is already my personal game of the year. I don't think it would be exaggeration to say that the best part of Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is its world. I would probably say something similar about KCD 1, but I am much more confident in saying it about KCD 2. Even with all the other components of this game being massively improved, the world is by far the most captivating aspect of KCD 2, and is ultimately what's going to keep you coming back time and time again. From the moment the first cutscene ended and I was able to walk around this camp as Henry by the pond, I was encapsulated by these visuals. This game doesn't look good in the same way that Cyberpunk looks good, or the same way that Ghost of Tsushima looks good, where you have visually stunning environments that are designed to look like a painting or concept art. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 looks good in the same way that Red Dead Redemption 2 looks good. And I don't say that in relation to graphical quality, although it is up to par. I say that because this game is trying to create environments that immerse you above all else. But to say that this world feels real is honestly an injustice and does not properly convey what it is like to explore the world of 15th century Bohemia. You can almost feel the leaves crunching beneath your feet as you walk through a forest blowing in the wind. Smell the sawdust and beer as you enter the local town, and feel the cold of the stones in the Kuttenberg taverns, only warmed by the conversations they surround. Exploring this world doesn't just feel real. It makes your role in it feel important, and spending time away from this world feels like time wasted. That is how this world makes you feel. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is comprised of 2 maps, each roughly the size of KCD 1's singular map, the first of which being the Trotsky region. This map is gorgeous, and it's probably my favorite of the 2 maps. This map contains much more rural areas and smaller towns and villages, with a lot of forests, plains, and beautiful rocky formations. Of course, with this grand castle at the center of it all. I think my favorite part about this map is just how small it feels. Not in terms of size, mind you, but rather the local nature of this map and how each area feels so regular. In my opinion, the main selling point of the Kingdom Come Deliverance games are to immerse you in a believable and realistic medieval world, and this first map in particular allows that focus to shine, as you don't really feel like a knight out to save the world in this map, but rather as just another villager getting by. Of course, this feeling changes slightly when you begin to progress the main quest, where the events are much grander than the towns that surround them. But simply focusing on this map alone, I don't believe you can design a map better suited for KCD2 than this. The best example of what I mean comes in a questline between two towns, Takov and Zhelyov. These are two relatively small towns with tightly knit communities, and through a series of land disputes, these two communities are at war with each other. But not a war fought with swords and shields, rather fought with painting the farmer's bulls another color, throwing mud at a freshly painted house, or stealing a handful of carrots from the local merchant. This quest is aptly titled The Battle of Frogs and Mice, and this quest is not only very well designed, but it is the perfect example of the events within this map feeling so personal, connected, and real. And it makes spending time in the Trotsky region extremely believable, as if you are a part of these tightly knit communities, where the biggest worries are not of king's disputes, but of bandits roaming the woods. And in terms of memorable locations, this map does not disappoint. Apollonia is simply beautiful, with these giant rocky formations and trees that emphasize the beauty of 15th century Bohemia. The nomad's camp is situated upon this cliffside, overlooking a giant pond with this group of deserted humans that spend their days traveling and sharing a beer by a campfire. Troskowitz is the largest town in this map, and it feels just large enough to act as a hub of trade and commerce, but just small enough to still feel like it belongs within this region. And of course, the Grand Trotsky Castle, which you simply cannot look away from the moment it enters your sight. But in my opinion, the best part about this map is its natural elements. This map is riddled with forests, ponds, rivers, and cliffsides. KCD1 had some damn good looking forests, and they have gotten even better here. Warhorse Studios have said that their main reason for choosing the Cry engine for KCD1 and KCD2 is for the way that it renders forests and vegetation, and it is clear that their decision paid off. Every tree trunk and bush feels like it belongs there, and I simply loved walking through these woods every chance that I got. This is a world that emphasizes the beauty of the natural world, and even with a city as grand as Kuttenberg, it couldn't quite match the splendor of these forests and fields. But it did come close, so let's get into why Kuttenberg is one of the best cities I have ever seen in a video game like this. I remember how it felt the moment I arrived in the second map of KCD2 around 35 hours into my playthrough. I knew what I was in for. Kuttenberg. It had been all around the marketing of this game, and I simply could not wait to see this grand city for myself. However, that isn't what I saw, not at first. I saw towns, similar to the ones that I had already been seeing in the previous map. Yet I do not say this as a negative, rather as a pleasant surprise. What surprised me the most about the Kuttenberg region is how much of it is not Kuttenberg. I had spent at least 5 hours in the second area of the game before I even saw the Grand City. And I had spent all this time thinking to myself, if this much of the map is not the city itself, then just how big is this city gonna be? This was the wrong question to be asking, because when I had finally reached Kuttenberg, I was in awe of its grandiosity, but not for long. And over time, it was the familiarity and connectedness of the city that I really grew to love. Kuttenberg is big, very big, but it isn't quite as big as I originally believed it would be, and that's a good thing. You will get lost in this city for the first few hours, but as you spend more time here, these streets become increasingly familiar to you. And when that moment comes, is when the city really comes to life. You begin to feel like you are a member of the city rather than just a visitor. You know the ins and outs of its bustling streets and which roads lead where, the location of the nearest blacksmith or bathhouse, and who to call friend or foe. That is the real beauty of Kuttenberg. Its ability to integrate the player into the city as a functioning member, rather than just being placed on the outside looking in. And that is in large part due to the design of the city, but also due to the reputation system, food, energy, and cleanliness systems, and of course the quest design. As for the layout of the city, I believe it is phenomenal. Like I said, the best part about Kuttenberg is its connectedness. This is a very dense city with a lot going on no matter which district you are in. And speaking of districts, a key sign of a well-designed city is its unique districts, and this is without a doubt present in the city of Kuttenberg. The town square, the markets, the Jewish quarter, the mining district, the massive church and Italian court, and even the outskirts of the city with the gunsmith and the infamous hole-in-the-wall tavern. Each little area has its own unique look, traits, characters, and events going on, which makes going from one district to another feel distinct and keeps the exploration loop of Kuttenberg fresh no matter how long you are in there. Yet what adds to the quality of these districts is what goes on beneath them. Throughout your time in Kuttenberg, you will discover a series of connected underground tunnels, typically used to smuggle stolen goods, some of which are still left behind for you to pick up. These tunnels usually lead to basements in houses and shops, and if you are playing a more stealthy, not-so-honorable Henry, you can make use of these tunnels as a quick escape after a robbery. It must be no secret by now that I absolutely love Kuttenberg, from its layout, to the variety of the districts, to the way that it makes use of space. One criticism I do have of this city is that there are a lot of buildings that cannot be entered, which does kinda suck, especially compared to Ratai from the first game, where almost every single building can be entered. But even this did not lessen my enjoyment within these city walls, and I believe that Warhorse should be proud of designing a city as historically accurate, well-planned, and gorgeous as this. Yet what is even more important than all of that is the people of Kuttenberg, or rather the people of Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 as a whole. A cornerstone of any immersive open world is believable NPCs, with strong side quests and open world activities. Needless to say, KCD2 accomplishes this with flying colors. I'm sure you all know the difference between a good side quest and a bad one, so rather than re-explaining that, I would much rather just tell you about one of my favorite experiences in the world of 15th century Bohemia. Early in the game, you will encounter a herb woman named Bożena living in the middle of the woods, and after she helps you and Sir Hans escape certain death and patches you up, sooner or later she will have a quest for you. This quest involves her daughter Pavlena going missing, and she sends you to go look for her. And after some investigating, you find a piece of her dress scattered at a romantic spot in the middle of the woods, only the spot is empty and there is a bloodied rock cast aside next to the blanket. You continue digging and find out that a local pig herder saw a man named Straw dragging a dead body out of the woods a few moments ago. The nerves ramp up and you immediately go and confront Straw, and after some hemming and hawing, he admits to what happened and spills the details on a farmer named Jakesh who lives in town. Jakesh married his wife Ludmilla and had 3 healthy children, all of which went through relatively easy births. So easy that by the time of the 4th child, Jakesh didn't believe they needed a midwife, and so he refused to ask Bożena to assist with the birth of his 4th child. Unfortunately, this birth did not go as well as the last few, and when Jakesh sent for Bożena, it was already too late. Ludmilla had given birth to a stillborn child and had died in childbirth herself. Jakesh, refusing to come to terms with what had happened, blamed Bożena for the tragedy and had her exiled from the village. However, as angry as Jakesh was, he would never go as far as to kidnap Bożena's daughter. Yet one day, he hired a group of farmhands who overheard him ranting and raving about Bożena and the death of his daughter while drunk, and had taken his words to heart. They then proceeded to attack Pavlena's boyfriend and take her hostage. The quest ends with you saving Pavlena, assuming you picked the right dialogue options, and choosing Yakish's fate. This quest came quite early on in the game, and it instantly set the tone for what was to come. A perfectly paced, well-written, enthralling side quest from start to finish that had an emotional center. KCD1 had many great side quests, but if this individual example doesn't showcase the overall increase in quality of side quests in KCD2, then I don't know what will. But that's just side quests. What about world activities? In KCD1, there were dynamic world events that would take place at random in various locations. I say dynamic, but these events really boiled down to bandit ambushes, a merchant you encounter on a lonely road, or maybe a man who tells you a riddle. Apart from that, not really all that much. However, in KCD2, the amount of world events has more than doubled, possibly even tripled. I'm not confident I have seen every type of random encounter there is to see, and I have more than finished the game by now. One of my earliest encounters was a messenger, who was looking for a lost letter in a panic. Upon confrontation, he admits he lost the letter and that his master will be furious with him. Unless...
Punch me in the face.
What?
Smack me in the gob. I'll say I was ambushed on the way and they took the letter.
Very well then. Defend yourself.
Again, this is only one example of many world events that can occur in KCD2. Another example went like this. Once, I ran into a group of bandits who were gonna rob me, yet changed their mind when they found out that I was the guy who competed in the sword fighting tournament in Kuttenberg a few days ago. Since they were really big fans, they decided to let me go. The world just seems so much more believable here in KCD2, which is a big accomplishment considering how great KCD1's world already was. Whether you are strolling the quiet woods outside of Troskowitz, or stuffed in the middle of a bustling marketplace in Kuttenberg, there is so much for you to see and enjoy in the world of Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. One of the most improved aspects of KCD2 over its predecessor is the combat. Ever since I was a kid, I loved sword fighting. At first, it started out through Star Wars and my love for lightsaber fights in the original and prequel trilogies. Then it was Pirates of the Caribbean. But as I got older, this translated into a growing interest in medieval sword fighting, specifically HEMA, or Historical European Martial Arts. If you've been following the channel for a bit, then you'll know I also love games like The Witcher and For Honor for similar reasons. And when I first began playing Kingdom Come Deliverance 1, I was so excited by the prospect of having a game where I could be in first-person control of a European sword fight, feinting my attacks, learning combos, clinches. And I got what I wanted. For the first 10 to 15 hours, because at some point throughout the game, you unlock an ability called the Master Strike. This was an ability that not only allowed you to parry an attack, but also perform a counterattack with one simple button press. It did not matter which direction you or the enemy was facing, as long as you hit the Master Strike button in time, then you would perform one. But this ability was not unique to you. Other enemies could perform it as well and at complete random. As soon as I learned this was the case, I immediately stopped engaging with the rest of the game's mechanics and began only using the Master Strike, only because the game had been incentivizing me to do so. There was no reason to attack the enemy because there was always a chance they could respond with a Master Strike and I would be punished for it. This ability completely trivialized the combat in the first game, and soon turned what was to be an immersive, tactical, realistic sword fighting experience into something that boiled down to pressing a single button at the right time. What made the combat even worse was the fact that enemies could control space far better than you could, forcing you to spend entire fights walking backwards, as this was the only way to avoid getting attacked by the enemy. Normally games have a dodge button you can perform that helps negate this issue, allowing you to quickly adjust your position on the battlefield and resume combat. KCD1 did have a dodge, but it did not work like other games. You could only perform a dodge when holding the directional keys or joystick in the direction of the attack at the right time. Similar to a parry or master strike, only this would consume stamina unlike a parry, and would not counterattack the enemy unlike a master strike. Ultimately, there was no reason to perform a dodge in the first game because of this. And lastly, arguably the most hated part of the combat in the first game was group fights. Anytime you would fight a group of enemies, even 3 or 4 strong, you would constantly be greeted with a barrage of unblockable attacks that made each fight extremely frustrating to handle, unless you abused the use of the Master Strike as mentioned before. Yes, I know it's realistic, but I don't care. It is possible to have group fights be challenging and fun at the same time, and KCD1 simply did not achieve that. But now, let's talk about the combat in the second game. To start, the Master Strike still exists, yet it has been changed significantly. Firstly, it can only be performed with a sword. Long sword or short sword doesn't matter, but it must be a sword. And this goes for enemies too. If you are fighting an enemy that is holding a mace, you can rest assured knowing that they have no way of using the Master Strike against you. This is done to separate a nuanced and tactical sword fight from a brawl with maces and axes. But the most important change is that Master Strikes can only be performed by hitting the attack button at the right time while facing the opposite direction of the enemy's attack. If the enemy is attacking you from the right, you must be facing to the left in order to successfully pull off a Master Strike. And this also goes both ways. Your enemy will no longer Master Strike you at random. They will only do so if you attack in the opposite direction to the stance that they are currently in. This change is so subtle, yet completely changes the way you think about combat. A seasoned combatant might throw out an attack they know the enemy can't Master Strike, have the enemy riposte their attack, forcing the enemy to throw out an attack of their own from a different direction, only to counter their attack in return. But now, let's talk about the dodge. Well, in all honesty, there isn't much to talk about except for the fact that there is now a dedicated dodge button that allows you to dodge in any direction at any time, free from the contextual chains of the first game. This now only gives you more control over when and how you avoid an attack, but also makes repositioning yourself much easier and makes combat just overall much more manageable, especially in group fights. Enemies can also no longer control space far greater than you can. Yes, they will approach you and try to move around you, but now you are the one setting the tempo of the fight. This is not only a response to the combat in the first game, but also aligns with the character of Henry as he grows up and becomes a more seasoned fighter. One downside to this is that since enemies that you aren't locked onto don't attack you nearly as often as the ones you are locked onto, group fights do lose a bit of immersion. I know I just said that I don't care if the group fights in the first game were immersive, if they are badly designed, and now I'm complaining about the opposite. So I'm impossible to please, right? Well, maybe, but I just think it would have been beneficial to have all enemies attack you at roughly the same frequency, but still with enough time in between attacks to not feel like you are being barraged. This would make you feel like you are still fighting 5 enemies simultaneously, rather than 5 separate individual fights. And this ties into an even larger issue with KCD2's combat. It's a bit too easy. This is especially true late game, once you are able to get your hands on the best equipment, where you can easily kill an enemy with a single Master Strike. On the bright side, this issue can be easily solved by simply tweaking a few damage values. Besides these minor issues, KCD2 blows the first game out of the water with its combat on a mechanical basis and on a visual basis. Animations are realistic and finisher kills are especially well done. And thank God the slow motion effect from the first game is gone too. This feels like such a small change, but I can't describe how much more fluid it makes every combat encounter feel. If it wasn't clear already, I believe KCD2 improves on the combat of the first game in every single way. Even the 5 directional stances being reduced to 4 works well and is necessary for the improvements made to the Master Strike, which I've already spoken about as an incredible change. KCD2's combat is exactly what KCD1 wanted its combat to be, but wasn't able to achieve. And most importantly, it makes me incredibly happy to say that KCD2 delivers that exact sword fighting experience that I wanted as a kid all those years ago. But if sword fighting isn't quite your thing, then there are some other options to dispatch of enemies, albeit some situational ones. Ranged combat is far improved over the first game, like everything else. KCD1 was notorious for having a bow and arrow that was extremely hard to use, not only because of the missing reticle in the center of the screen, but also because of the positioning of the bow from your perspective. Here in KCD2, the reticle is still missing for added immersion, but now the bow is positioned much more centrally and it is far easier to use than before. There are even bows that specialize in hunting and in combat, with many different arrow types to use as well. But the bow and arrow is something that we already are accustomed to. What about the new ranged options? The crossbow and the pistol are both excellent additions to this medieval sandbox, each with various pros and cons. Let's start with the crossbow. It is a simple weapon that is just as easy to use as the bow and can be quite deadly as well. The one issue I have with the crossbow is that, functionally, it is extremely similar to the bow and arrow. One minor change is that you are able to leave the crossbow loaded before firing, allowing you an opportunity to load, reposition, then fire the crossbow. With a bow, once you are loaded, repositioning will force you to have to reload before firing. However, loading a bow is quicker than loading the crossbow. But that's about all there is to separate them. The crossbow is a fun change of pace if you don't quite want to use a bow, but were you to use a bow, you would not feel much difference. A good addition that adds variety and historical accuracy, but not much else. However, the pistol is a different story. Loading this thing takes forever. It's incredibly hard to aim, and it can sometimes just blow up in your face. But if you are able to load it before an enemy gets to you without it blowing up in your face, then you are able to take a shot, and if you happen to land that shot, you can kiss that enemy goodbye. If they are wearing nothing or full plate armor, it won't make a difference. This high-risk, high-reward weapon must be used smartly, and if it is, it will wield great results. Enter a fight with a bunch of enemies, pick out the most heavily armored one, line up a shot, and you could potentially lower the threat in an instant. I had a blast using this weapon, and I really believe that it is a very strong addition to the combat loop. Overall, your ranged options are much better than they were in the first game, and even what was already included in the first game is now much improved. I found myself using a bow much more often in this game due to the improvements made, and I enjoyed hunting animals more than I did in the first game for the same reason. While the crossbow offers a new point of view and some minor changes with regards to loading the weapon, it doesn't offer much more that the bow doesn't already offer. Meanwhile, the pistol is a fantastic addition that has a very high risk of use, but offers a very high reward if you manage to pull off a shot. The stealth system is one of the most interesting aspects of KCD2 from an analysis perspective. If I were to encapsulate my thoughts about the stealth of KCD2, I would say that it is much better than the first game. But the implementation of stealth is handled much worse than the first game. What do I mean by that? In KCD1, stealth was a feature that was rarely required of you, and even if the main quest suggested it, there was usually another way around using stealth. The one example of mandatory stealth that comes to mind is towards the end of the first game, where you have to escape from a camp. But besides that, stealth was usually a choice rather than a necessary mechanic you had to engage with during some parts of the story. And thank God for that, because the stealth in KCD1 was not very good. Enemies would spot you through walls, guards would somehow know you committed a crime even if you did so entirely by stealth and nobody saw you, and there was absolutely no mechanics that allowed you to control stealth encounters, whether by luring guards, setting traps, or causing any other distractions. The best part of the stealth from KCD1 was the way that it involved considering the proper attire. Like everything else in KCD1 and KCD2, what you wear will depend on the situation you are in. You cannot wear full plate armor while sneaking around because it will make noise and you will get caught easier. KCD2 takes that aspect about the first game and everything else that worked about stealth in the first game, builds upon it, and adds a couple new features that make the stealth experience more fun. At least for a time. To start, let's go over the good. Enemy detection is now a lot more finely tuned, and you will rarely feel like you got caught unfairly during stealth, which is great. Certain elements of how you present yourself during stealth are actually improved over the first game. For instance, if you don't wash for a while and your clothes are dirty, you will smell. And if you smell, it is actually more likely for enemies to catch you because of your scent, which is a great detail. And most importantly, you can now throw rocks. That sounds like I'm joking, but no, the ability to throw rocks to lure enemies to specific locations is a big change that makes stealth encounters much more manageable this time around. Except, this rock throwing mechanic is not entirely a good thing, and here is where we get to the bad of stealth in KCD2. There are multiple mandatory stealth encounters in KCD2 throughout its main quest, and these encounters aren't simple 5 to 6 enemy encounters. At times, you will have to sneak through a forest or a castle that has upwards of 20 to 30 guards actively looking for you. So, meet your new best friend, the rock throw. The amount of times I had to spam this rock throw during this game is absurd. It's almost as if KCD2 figured out the most simple lure mechanic in video game history, and all of a sudden thought that was enough to uphold multiple large-scale stealth encounters. I'm sorry to say, that is not the case. Something as simple as a rock throw becomes a crutch the game leans on in order to satisfy the minimum mechanical requirements needed to make these stealth encounters possible. There is a quote one of the NPC merchants say in the first game that I think applies to this game's stealth quite well. Man cannot live by bread alone, but he can't live without it either. Take bread out of that quote and replace it with rock throwing, and you have an accurate analysis of KCD2's stealth. Not to mention the absurdity of having an infinite supply of rocks that you can just throw even while indoors. It's so disappointing because when you aren't being forced to handle a situation stealthily during the main quest, and you are instead sneaking through houses or into camps while out in the open world, the stealth actually becomes a lot more fun. You are no longer reliant on spamming rock throws because there are a lot less enemies. And when you do lure an enemy away using the rock throw, it never feels like it's your only option. Not to mention the fact that you are not being forced to use stealth out in the open world, and no potential encounter is designed to be taken by combat or stealth in particular, giving the player further choice. Now, look, I don't always think that player choice should be prioritized over curated level design. Many games will throw mediocre stealth into the gameplay loop yet never ask the player to make use of it, simply acting as a choice for the player without that choice having any eventual meaning. Taking an encounter by stealth or combat in most games is an inconsequential choice, and I would actually say that having curated levels during the main quest, where forcing you down a path of combat or stealth, can actually be beneficial, as it usually results in those levels being better designed, even if it sacrifices player choice. But in the case of KCD2, I actually think it's better to offer player choice more often than curated level design, simply because I don't believe this stealth is good enough to uphold multiple, large-scale, mandatory stealth encounters. Simply put, there are some annoying stealth levels here, and I think this game would have been slightly stronger if it reworked or at least tweaked some of these levels. The story of KCD1 ends with Henry, Hans, and their crew riding off into the sunset with the goal of reaching Trotsky Castle and delivering a message from the League of Lords to Sir Otto von Bergov. and the story of KCD2 picks up only a few days after the ending of KCD1, with Sir Hans and Henry continuing their journey. After setting up camp and learning the basics of the mechanics of the game, Henry and Hans sneak off to find some
Females!
However, in the process, your entire crew are ambushed and killed by an unnamed group of bandits, and you are left with not even the clothes on your back. You make your escape and sneak through these rocky cliffsides when you get into a fight with one of the bandits and are gravely injured. All the while, Henry is having visions of the Scowlet invasion and the death of his parents. Luckily, after his injury, an old herb woman named Bojena is nearby and helps restore both Henry and Hans to full health. Once you help collect some herbs and bury some bodies, you have dinner with Bojena and her daughter, then make it to the local town of Troskowitz. At first, you make your way up to Trotsky Castle and attempt to deliver your message. But considering you and Hans look like you just crawled out of a stack of hay, the guards assume that you are just some beggars and kindly turn you away. After your embarrassing attempt, you make it back to Troskowitz and begin doing some local work to earn some money, and then you run into one of the
Females!
from earlier, yet even she denies ever seeing you. Interesting. Then you get into a fight with some people at the tavern and are locked up in the pillory. Eventually, you and Hans are released, and Hans leaves you as he feels like everything that has gone wrong is somehow Henry's fault. And after all of that, you are finally let free into the open world. Sounds long? It is. This is just the introduction of the game, and it can last you at least 3 hours, maybe more. I knew the moment I finished this introductory phase that I would not be looking forward to replaying it on my future playthroughs, because even though there is a lot of interesting stuff here, such as Henry having illusions of Scowlets while being dragged by Sir Hans, most of this introduction drags on for quite some time, and what little gameplay is present here is very rudimentary, mostly involving you picking flowers, carrying bodies very slowly, brewing potions, and hauling heavy bags at the tavern also very slowly. You barely have any combat, stealth, or exploration. In fact, this entire introduction is very linear. I would say the worst thing about this opening is simply the predictability of it. You know exactly where Henry and Hans are going to end up in an hour or two. You knew that your stats would be completely reset and that the story would need an excuse for Henry and Hans to be separated. And then you spend the next hour or two watching the plot do exactly what you already knew that it would. On the bright side, this constricting, linear, and predictable opening makes the eventual release into the open world that much more satisfactory, because it is the exact opposite of the introduction. It is unpredictable, free to explore as you choose, and features plenty of interesting gameplay scenarios. This is where KCD2 really begins, and boy is it wonderful. Despite the lengthy introduction, the plot remains very strong throughout. The majority of your time in the first map is spent trying to locate Sir Otto von Berghoff and deliver the aforementioned message from the League of Lords. First, you try and find him at a wedding that he is rumored to be attending, but unfortunately, he does not show up. This wedding quest was incredible, by the way. Many of the guests of the wedding are side characters that you can find in the open world, and depending on if you have met them earlier and completed some of their side quests, they will treat you differently when you arrive at the wedding and greet them. After the wedding, Henry is seemingly caught flirting with the bride and gets into a large fight with the guards, which then leads to him and Hans being locked up in Trotsky Castle. I have to tell you, by this point I was enthralled in the main story. I genuinely had no idea where it was going, and finally getting to see the inside of Trotsky Castle was something that I was incredibly delighted to do. Unfortunately, this transpires into one of those mandatory stealth sections that I said I didn't like, but it does result in you also saving Sir Hans from being hung, which is quite cool, and after you do that, you run into von Berghoff, and not only do you get to deliver the message to him, you also begin completing some tasks for him. This chapter culminates in you returning to the venue of the wedding, where you make an important decision regarding siding with Olda and Jan Semin, or with Hashek, the right-hand man of Berghoff. I personally chose to side with Jan Semin, but regardless of your choice, this results in the wedding venue being burned to the ground. The next 5 or so hours is arguably the best portion of the main quest. You and Lord Burgov's men ride out to take out the bandits that attacked you in the beginning, and you get ambushed in the woods. This entire section is not only enthralling from a plot standpoint, but from a directorial one too. The way you witness this ambush from the first-person perspective of a soldier, seeing one of your fellow men be shot by some weapon you have never seen before, a tree falling over you, and the blurry, distorted vision you have while making your escape, is nothing short of incredibly immersive and very, very well done. You then make it to a clearing. Hans is lying on the ground wounded, and you are greeted by a familiar face, or should I say helmet. The same man who led the ambush at your camp arrives again, but decides to grant you an honorable duel, rather than having one of his men shoot you down. And after you defeat him in a duel, this scene plays.
Enough! Damn it, boss. You're good. Ah!
Shishka, you all right?
Do you reckon you can trust an outlaw to keep his word of honor?
The moment I saw this scene, I instantly knew who this bandit was. In the lead up to the release of this game, there were murmurs of a historical figure being in this game, someone by the name of Jan Žižka. Out of curiosity, I looked up the real Jan Žižka and read a little bit about him before the release of this game. Famous for being a revolutionary militaristic tactician who never lost a battle in his entire life. Also famous for his use of maces and him only having one eye. Little fun fact, there's actually a massive statue of the real Jan Žižka in Prague currently, and I mean just wow, look at this thing. Needless to say, this scene was a dead giveaway, but it did not detract from this reveal at all. In history, most people agree that Žižka lost his eye in battle at a young age, and twisting the story here to hint that Henry may have been the one to cause his infamous injury was a spectacular decision. Žižka is easily my favorite character in this game, partially because of the historical intrigue, but also because Warhorse did this Czech icon justice with his portrayal in this story. He is commanding, calculating, and charming. Every scene he is present in was an absolute joy to watch. After finding out that you and Žižka are actually on the same side rather than enemies, and that his ambush from earlier was a misunderstanding, the two of you begin to plot against none other than Istvan Toth, the main villain of KCD1, to finally resolve the storyline between Henry and Toth. After escaping prison and participating in a large siege where you fight off the forces of von Burgov, your previous ally, Henry and his crew are trapped in a tower, and are forced to watch as the finger of God points towards their destruction.
Fall back! Everyone, away from the tower!
I wouldn't be so sure about that.
What the fuck is that?
Get ready!
Pater Noster, Kies in Kielis.
Time!
Et debite nobis debita nostra sicut.
Take cover!
Et nos dimitimus debitoribus nostris.
Everyone away from the wall.
Et ni nos inducas in tentationem. But deliver us from evil.
This scene is again another example of directing in video games. When you think of how a movie is shot and plays out, the role of a director is paramount to that vision becoming a success. helping the actors embody their roles exactly as needed, positioning the camera to convey effective visual storytelling, and conferring with writers and staff to ensure that their movie is at its best. When you think of video game storytelling, you almost never think about the role of a director in how the story plays out, but it is arguably just as important. Cinematography exists in video games despite the lack of an actual camera, and how each scene plays out still needs heavy guidance from a director. And KCD2 proves this with many of its scenes, but this one especially. The rising music, flashing back and forth between the perspective of Henry and the perspective of the men about to fire this cannon. It is simply brilliant. It is also brilliant that Henry and his crew somehow managed to survive this blast and make it into captivity. And after some torture, you are saved by that same woman you saw at the tavern earlier, and it is revealed that her name is Catherine, and she is a military spy working for Zizka. Going back to real-world history here, Catherine was the name of the wife of Jan Zizka, although not much was known about her and her relationship with him. Choosing to change the character of Catherine to not Zizka's lover, but rather his fellow spy and warrior, I thought was a very welcome change, and brings a bit more nuance to their relationship. Warhorse saw the empty gaps in her real story and decided to fill them in with their own special twist, and I absolutely love it. But back to captivity, Catherine shows up at just the right time and saves all of you from imprisonment. In fact, you may have not seen too much of it yet, but the amount of times that the characters find themselves imprisoned yet manage a miraculous escape in this story is bewildering. Still, despite these repeated strokes of luck, the sequence that follows is also one of the major highlights of this story. The conclusion to the conflict between Henry and Toth. You sneak your way through Trotsky Castle in one of the stealth sections I don't like, and make it to the top where Istvan is enjoying a cup of wine. You are given a choice of granting Istvan an honorable duel or gutting him like a dog. I chose to give him the honorable duel. The following scene plays out.
In the end, see, I was right. The stronger dog. Fucks the bitches.
I'm sure you're sick of me talking about directing by this point, but again, it applies here. The pouring rain and dark of night seeping in through the windows as you duel at the peak of the castle was just an incredible decision and an incredible setting, and really added a cinematic quality to this moment. I also have to say that finally seeing Istvan dead was incredibly satisfying, even if his character was almost cartoonishly evil. I won't spend too much time going over each and every main plot point, otherwise this video would be much longer, but what I will say is that the plot is structured very similarly to KCD1 initially, yet eventually reaches a point where the utter scope of this game is revealed to you, and it can honestly feel draining. That point comes almost right after Istvan's death, when you reach the second map of the game. If you beeline the main story, by the time you reach the second map, you will have already played at least 20 hours of main quest, and only main quest. If you spend time completing side content, then that can easily jump up to 35 to 40 hours, which is the length of an entire game. And then it is revealed to you that you are only halfway through the main story alone and have an entire second map to explore that is just as large as the first, with the most densely populated area in all of KCD on top of that. I highly recommend taking a break from this game once you reach this point. While you may be very excited to explore Kuttenberg and its surroundings, and believe me, it will not disappoint, I do strongly believe that you should put down the game for at least a few days before continuing, because it can be very easy to burn out after the first few hours spent in this second region, simply because of the daunting length and size of this game. But regardless of the length of the game and the reveal that you are only halfway through the story despite putting in 40 plus hours once you reach the second map, This second half of the story is just as good as the first, perhaps even better. Weirdly, it almost feels like another sequel to Henry's story. If we were to split this entire story into 3 acts, from KCD1 all the way to the end of this game, the entire story of KCD1 would be the first act, the first map in KCD2 would be the second act, and the Kuttenberg region all the way up until the end of the story would be the third and final act. This is interesting because the tone and foundation that this story lies on takes a very drastic turn once you reach the second map, in a good way that is. The first map had you mainly on your own, completing tasks around the Trotsky region to work your way up to a meeting with von Berghoff, and then eventually working for him once you earn that meeting. But after that bombastic transitional period between the first and second map, the story really finds its footing in terms of a consistent formula. This final act of the story involves you and a pack of bandits led by Jan Žižka forming a plan to drive Sigismund out of Bohemia, and I absolutely love how this part of the story is structured. It feels like they took the Band of Bastards DLC in KCD1, which had incredibly high potential yet didn't fulfill it due to its incredibly short runtime, and actually fulfilled its potential and then some. This group of characters was so easy to connect with, primarily due to their differing personalities, unique struggles, and altering opinions on the conflict you are taking part in. What is this conflict, you may ask? It is what the entire story revolves around in both games. Sigismund of Hungary versus King Wenceslas. 2 historical figures and a historical conflict as well. King Wenceslas was granted the Bohemian throne, yet never actually wanted to be a ruler, and spent most of his time partying, wasting his funds, and taking his job very carelessly, earning him the title of Wenceslas the Idle. Sigismund saw this as opportunity, and began invading and pillaging the lands of Bohemia with the goal of taking the throne for himself, as he figured he would be a much better ruler. However, in the process, maybe went a bit too far with his invasion, as his army was responsible for the raising of Skalitz, and by correlation, the death of Henry's parents. Not everyone shares this same perspective, of course, and you will constantly run into people, whether out in the open world or during the main quest, that side with Sigismund. Since you see this story from the perspective of someone who sides with Wenceslas, it may make it seem as if Sigismund and his allies are all inherently evil people, because that is what Henry believes. But this is of course not necessarily the case, and KCD2 addresses this in one of the best scenes of the entire game. But we will get to that later. As for this group of bandits, I've already spoken about how much I love Žižka's character, but beyond him, characters like Janosch, Adder, Kubienka, and of course Dry Devil were simply hilarious. But their only purpose is not comedic relief. There's this one moment where you are planning to invade a castle with this group of soldiers, and Dry Devil is suggesting that they burn a nearby village in order to draw out the guards. You have the choice of either going along with this plan or choosing a more peaceful option that minimizes innocent deaths. If you choose the more peaceful option like I did, you and Dry Devil will get into a fight, both verbal and non-verbal. Scenes like this remind you that there is more to these characters than just the jokes they crack in the tavern. These are people that have seen war, understand the consequences and difficult decisions you must make during war. I think this is really what made it easy to connect with these characters, because they are just that, characters. They are not caricatures, not common storytelling tropes. They genuinely act like and interact with one another as if they were real people, and nobody deserves more credit than Warhorse Studios for bringing these characters to life. Speaking of war, one of the largest themes of this story is the consequences that war has on people. It seems obvious enough, we all grow up hearing about war being bad, we may watch movies that give us a glimpse of what war is really like, but playing a game like this, especially towards the end, really does an excellent job of putting you in the shoes of someone who is suffering as a result of war. This is best demonstrated during the final siege of the game, which I will also get to later. But back to the main story, you continue with Žižka's gang and... Wait, what? What's that? I'm forgetting someone. No, I don't think no. Oh, wait, no, that's right, I am. You may have noticed that I have been avoiding covering one of the most important characters in this story, Father Godwin. For those of you unfamiliar with Father Godwin, let me give you a little rundown of his character. Father Godwin was a character present in KCD1. He was only involved in one main quest, and occasionally plays a small role in some side quests throughout the game. He is a priest who really enjoys some not-so-heavenly pursuits. The one main quest that does involve him has you getting absolutely shit-faced at the local tavern, getting into a brawl at said tavern, throwing up over the side of a bell tower, getting into some activities that I cannot show on YouTube, chasing sheep around in a field, and waking up extremely hungover in his house right before he has to go and deliver mass. It is a hilarious quest, and is one of the best quests arguably in all of KCD1. And because of this incredible quest, the character of Father Godwin became extremely beloved within the KCD community. But let's take a step back and actually look at what made Father Godwin such a beloved character specifically. I would argue that the reason Father Godwin works so well in KCD1 is because of his lack of importance to the overall plot. The reason I say this is because I think the character of Father Godwin is best at breathing life into the world of 15th Century Bohemia. The fact that you just happen to run into this hilarious priest character leaves you excited at the prospect of meeting other characters that are just as likable as him. But beyond the comedic side of his character, the game hints at his character having a background in battle, as he is adept with a sword and comments on him being in a few battles when he was younger. Overall, Father Godwin is a very comedic character with a slightly intriguing past that is left purposefully vague, and I believe his character works really well because of his disconnect to the main plot. When Father Godwin was revealed to be in KCD 2, I and many others were very excited to see this beloved character return. We did not know the role he would play in the main story, but we were excited anyway, as there were many ways to write his character into this story, and we simply could not wait to see what Warhorse would do with his character. This is not Father Godwin. He may look like him, he may have some similar traits, and he may even show glimpses of what he was in the first game. But this is not Father Godwin. The role Father Godwin plays in this story is incredibly large. You even play as him periodically throughout the main quest, and it is the complete antithesis of what made him work so well in the first game. This is not a character that needs to be important, and yet he is. And I think I know why. Warhorse saw how beloved this character was, and they knew that including him in the second game was gonna please many fans. But it almost feels that they included this character without asking themselves what made him so beloved to begin with. His vague background, his carefree attitude, and his disconnectedness to the plot was what caused so many people to find this character interesting, and all of those things are completely thrown out of the window in this game. His past is no longer vague and is explored in great detail, as you hear about the battles he took place in, and you even meet his father and brother. His carefree attitude is also mostly gone, as he is now at the forefront of planning how to drive out Sigismund and his forces, and he is no longer disconnected from the plot either, and is instead a key factor in it. Now, all that being said, I still do like this character. He is interesting, his backstory was well executed, and I do think he is a welcome addition to Zizka's band and this story overall. But this is not the same character that was in the first game. I mean, not at all. And I am so surprised that I'm not hearing anyone talking about this. I haven't even mentioned the fact that he is voiced by a completely different voice actor, and he does not even make an attempt to sound like Father Godwin in the first game. Which, again, is not a bad thing. The voice actor does a great job, but it is a very, very different voice to Father Godwin from the first game, and it is very noticeable. Overall, I was quite surprised about the handling of Father Godwin in this game, and while I did like his character here, it is a very different character. It almost felt like this was supposed to be an entirely different character originally, but Warhorse decided to convert him into Father Godwin for the purpose of pleasing fans, without changing any of the traits possessed by the character in his place. There is, of course, another character returning from the first game, Sir Hans Capon. His involvement in the first game was much more prominent than Father Godwin, and I think they did an excellent job of taking the relationship these two had in the first game and evolving it in the second game. And that's the key word here, evolve. This is not a one-to-one copy-paste of Henry and Hans's relationship in the first game, where they started kind of as enemies, then formed a sort of bromance. Here, you see more angles of their relationship. After Sir Hans blames Henry for all of their wronggoings early on in the game, he eventually apologizes for it. There is another moment where you must sneak into a castle to rescue Sir Hans, and you learn that he has developed claustrophobia from that cannon scene I mentioned earlier. This is also where you run into Brabant, this French guy who probably won't be important later. He doesn't matter, just forget about him. Back to Hans. We see plenty of character development for both Henry and Hans throughout the story, and I am extremely glad that Warhorse chose to throw some curveballs into their relationship rather than just keeping it exactly as it was in the first game. You can also turn that bromance into a romance if you like, and I heard it's a genuinely well-written romance, although I did not go down that path, so I don't know too much about it. Just know that it is an option and apparently a good one. Regardless, Henry and Hans are at the center of this game, and I could not be happier with the direction they took them in. Okay, it's time to talk about the finale of this game. As mentioned earlier, you spend much of this portion of the game planning ways to drive Sigismund's forces out of Bohemia, and eventually you devise a plan. Steal Sigismund's silver, and then he won't be able to pay his army, forcing him to leave. Meanwhile, John of Liechtenstein and Margrave Jobst are out amassing an army to come and help drive out Sigismund and his forces. This leads to one of the best quests in the game, which involves you robbing the Italian court. This building was responsible for the actual minting of silver coins in Bohemia around this time, and it is where Sigismund is storing his money. In order to get in, you get Father Godwin to dress up as a cardinal and pretend to know how to speak Italian, which is simply brilliant. I mentioned that there were brief moments where Father Godwin felt like his old self, and this was one of them. I absolutely loved this moment. Once you get in, Henry and the crew sneak through the main courtyard and take out the guards. Then you make your way into the meeting room where Godwin is, and you get this incredible cutscene.
Gentlemen, please forgive this interruption. I am Captain Jan Žižka of Trotznov. This is a raid, and you are my prisoners.
Well, at last! I've had it up to the fucking eyeballs here.
Guard, seize them!
Godwin, parish priest of Ujits, at your service, your saintliness. And now, shut the fuck up or I'll redden your fucking cheeks for you.
But just as you begin to make your escape, Eric shows up. Eric is a minor antagonist who served as Istvan's right-hand man and had a strong connection with him. He was also present in the first game briefly, and I liked the direction they took his character here. You get into a big fight, but eventually make your escape, and just as everything seems to be going well, that French guy that I said wasn't important betrays you and takes all of your money, killing Adder in the process.
Boże, zgrzeszyłem. Właśnie przed chwilą zerżnąłem żonę sąsiada. Zabiłem też w życiu wielu ludzi, przeważnie jeszcze większych skurwysynów niż ja. Może to sprawia, że to mniejszy grzech. Święć się imię Twoje, przyjdź królestwo Twoje.
As much as I love this scene, I was quite surprised to see a character like Adder get this treatment, as he is mostly used for comedic relief purposes. But still, it was a welcome scene, and it ties back into the themes of war that I mentioned this game tackles earlier. After you make your escape, you make it to Sukdal Castle, and this is where the grand finale begins. You awake and learn that Sigismund and his forces are pulling out of Bohemia, and just as everything seems to be going well, Markvart von Owitz shows up with his own army, and von Bergov, who you previously held captive, made a miraculous escape. Hey, look at that. Dry Devil lands an incredible shot on Markvart in the chest, forcing him to retreat, and then you begin the Siege of Sukdal. And might I say that one of the most fun gameplay elements of KCD2 is the way that it handles siege warfare. Throwing rocks onto unsuspecting enemies, pushing ladders off walls with halberds, peeking over the battlements to try and land a shot with a crossbow. It's incredible stuff, man. This entire siege lasts for days, and the entire segment is handled expertly. You perform checkups on the guards, launch mini skirmishes, and strategize over how to defend against the Markvart's forces. You even reach a point where you begin to run out of food within the castle. Soldiers are starving, and you are forced to find uncomfortable ways to solve the hunger crisis. Eventually, you can no longer sit and wait for your men to be suffocated inside of Sukdal. Henry and Sam ride out to deliver a message to Margrave Jobst, asking for help, asking for an army. You sneak your way through a camp and find that filthy French traitor Brabant. But in the process, he reveals that Markvart is currently in the camp you are in. You are faced with a decision to kill or spare Brabant. As for me, I wasn't quite merciful. But then you begin to wonder about his claim of Markvart still remaining in the camp. You make your way to the building Brabant claimed he was in, and sure enough, there he is. I'm gonna let this cutscene play out for those who have not seen it or would just like to see it again. It is by far my favorite scene in the game, and reminded me just how good of storytellers Warhorse really are.
Where have you been? Pour me some wine. You didn't come here to pour me wine. You came here to kill me. Nice work getting here. But you went to a lot of trouble for nothing, boy. I'll be dead by morning anyway. That drunken bastard got me good. Who are you?
Henry. From Skalitz.
From Skalitz. Ah. Aren't you that boy who ran away from us? So those were your...
My parents.
Your father fought like a lion. And I see you're your father's son. You've done him proud.
You remember them?
Oh, yeah. I remember everyone I killed. That's not an everyday thing. Don't you? War is a nasty business. I only did what I had to do. Just like Zizka. Like the Dry Devil. Sigismund. Wenceslas. And you.
I'm not like you. Or Sigismund.
Ah, come now. Sigismund maybe went a bit too far. But all he was trying to do was to bring some order into the mess that idle drunkard Wenceslas made.
Bring order by slaughtering innocent people.
And are you sure you didn't kill someone's father or mother? But I don't want to preach you any sermons here. You came here with a purpose. I won't hold you back. Take your revenge. Huh? I don't want to sit here all night, dying slowly like a stuck pig.
Everything about this scene is simply fantastic. The haunting rendition of Mozart's Lacrimosa, the firelit background and dark surroundings, the dialogue, the theming, it's all amazing. This is something we have seen before in various stories. The idea that the villain is not so different from the hero, that revenge is pointless, and that in war, neither side is correct. But the fact that we have seen these themes before does not mean that their execution here is not amazing. Warhorse did not reinvent the wheel with this narrative or this scene. They simply took existing themes and ideas and perfected them. I am a sucker for morally ambiguous storytelling, and this scene gives me exactly that. It is easily my favorite scene in the game. But back to the story. You find some horses, and Henry and Sam ride their way out of town. You then return to Sir Hans and Godwin still fighting off the forces in the castle, the same events you saw at the very beginning of the game. And just as all hope seems to be lost,
It stinks like a festering wound here.
Henry, Radzig, Hanush, Jobst, and all of the forces they promised arrive. Radzig delivers a speech that could motivate just about anyone, and the army blazes towards Sukdal, ending it once and for all. Warhorse have earned this moment.
King Wenceslas!
Once it is all said and done, the game ends similar to how the first one did. A conversation between family, reflecting on the past, and then another conversation, again between family, thinking of the future, reflecting on life. What an incredible story. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 was everything I wanted it to be. I wanted it to match and exceed the immersive qualities the first game had, and it did that. I wanted it to have better designed combat and scratch that sword fighting itch I had for almost all my life, and it did that. I wanted it to have a world that was just as memorable, and it gave me 2 of them. I wanted the RPG elements to return new and improved, and they did. Even aspects of the game that I didn't really enjoy all that much, such as the stealth, are still much improved over the first game. But I think what really makes this experience is the journey it puts you on. The characters you will meet, the places you will explore, the stories you will hear, and how it impacts your story as Henry. Warhorse Studios have established themselves as one of the best to do it when it comes to designing immersive RPG games, and I simply cannot wait to see what they have in store for us next. Kingdom Come Deliverance is a game series that means a lot to me, and I was so excited when this game got announced. I wanted to love this game just as much as the first, and I am very pleased to say that I do.